runs across the road to the neighbor's house and says, something's happened at my house.
The neighbor quickly calls 911.
911, what is your emergency?
There have been 2 gunshots.
Okay, you need to get a hold of yourself and tell me from where.
Those shots were inside the house.
Idaho State Police Officer Ross Kirkley is first on the scene.
I just opened up the front door, and the house was dark inside except for a light coming from the hallway on my left. I had my weapon drawn as well. As I was going down the hallway,
Police?
In the master bedroom at the end of the hall, a grisly discovery.
I could see there was blood and brain material, bone, dripping from the ceiling, running down the walls.
There are 2 bodies, one nearly unrecognizable.
That was probably one of the more horrific scenes I've ever seen in my years in law enforcement.
The veteran detectives now know there is one, if not 2 murders they must solve. As daylight breaks, investigators examine the crime scene in a suburban home in Bellevue, Idaho.
There was a male body on the floor. The entire body was covered in blood, and there was no sign of life on him at all.
The victim is Alan Johnson, dead from a gunshot wound. And on the bed, a lump under the covers.
I just drew out my asp and extended it and flipped the covers back, and there was what was left of a female.
The second victim, Diane Johnson, suffered massive trauma to the head. Murder-suicide is the initial theory, but Sheriff Emling doesn't think so. The gunshot wound on Alan's body suggests a different story.
Going into the master bathroom, the bullet hole was straight in, chest level, into the tile. There's no way that you can shoot yourself in the chest with a rifle and have that bullet go straight into the wall. You can't do that.
If somebody's going to use a rifle to shoot themselves, most of the time they shoot themselves, they stick in their mouth or underneath their chin.
Alan, who had obviously been shot in the shower but struggled to get out and went to his wife's side. I had to get out to let people know that we have a double homicide here.
Somewhere out there, a cold-blooded killer was on the loose.
Now your fear is out there for your community. Somebody has left this scene. So, that immediately was, we have to track this person down.
Police turned to their only witness, the victim's daughter, Sarah Johnson.
She was pretty hysterical throughout most of her early interviews. She kept saying that they killed my parents, they killed my parents.
And had an officer do a quick interview if she saw anything, heard anything. And she indicated to my officer right then that she heard somebody go out that back sliding glass door. Coordinating that area off, I said, okay, this person escaped through the backyard. There's no fence. It goes to a high dirt bank in a river canal, and it's heavily wooded. So I immediately brought in my tracking team so that we could follow that lead.
The tracking team reaches a disturbing conclusion.
I said, Sheriff, nobody has left this backyard. The tracks follow the back part of the house and go over to this house that was just north of the Johnson residence.
The guest house is located on the back of Johnson's 1-acre lot.
It has a separate driveway to it and everything else. It is a garage downstairs and a guest apartment upstairs.
When detectives enter the garage, they find an alarming stockpile of evidence.
All the guns were locked up in the back apartment, or they didn't have a lot of guns there in the house.
We found the .22 rifle on top of the freezer. There was the box of the .32 pistol ammunition. And on the floor, we found one spent .264 Winchester Magnum casing. The other spent casing was in the rifle that was in the bathroom.
It was very evident that somebody had used a rifle, that it came from the guest house, and that rifle had been used to kill both Diana and Alan.
After searching that house, we said, well, wow, who lives here? And so we start running that down.
But the tenant can't be located. what detectives need is a suspect with a motive, and they're about to get some help. The murders of Alan and Diane Johnson sent a chill through the town of Bellevue, Idaho.
The community was in shock. Bellevue is a very small town, very quiet town, nestled in the mountains in Idaho, and nothing like this had ever happened before.
Everybody was just totally in shock. They just didn't know what to do. Everybody was just hugging and trying to console each other.
Matt Johnson, their oldest child, was attending the University of Idaho. Family members contacted Matt for us, and he immediately drove from Moscow, Idaho.
But like the rest of the family, he can't imagine who would want his parents dead.
We were lost. How did any of this happen? You know, we were really confused.
It was very bizarre. It really was. Alan and Diane were married about 20 years. They had just celebrated their 20th wedding anniversary just before this happened. They loved each other. For Diane, it was love at first sight. As soon as she saw Alan, she knew she wanted to marry him. Yeah, they had a wonderful time together. They really did.
They just did not have the kind of enemies that would give someone rise to do something like this. So we started looking closer, trying to figure out who would have it in for Alan and Diane.
Investigators follow up on something else Sarah has told them. 4 hours before the gunshots, she told them that another disturbance had woken her up.
She awoke at 2:30 in the morning or 3. She heard voices outside her window.
Moments later, the motion detector light on the guest house turned on.
She'd gotten up and woke up her father. Her father said, "Don't worry about it and go back to bed." And she had said that she believed that she recognized the voice as a cleaning lady.
It wouldn't be the first time the cleaning lady had been on the wrong side of the law.
This certain individual did have a criminal history. She was on probation. She was very well known to us. Again, we knew who she was. We'd had past dealings with her.
While they're still at the house, the sheriff hears a vehicle approaching.
As I looked up, the garbage truck was driving down the road coming to the Johnson's house. And I remember yelling, stop that garbage truck, turn him around, get him out of here. And that was probably, the best decision I made in this entire case.
Officers start digging through the Johnson's trash can and make a critical discovery.
When we started searching through the trash can, found a pink woman's robe. The robe was in good shape. It was like a brand new robe. It wasn't, worn out. It's not your typical thing to find in trash.
On the robe, what looks like blood. And there's more.
Inside one of the pockets was a latex glove and a brown leather glove. One of the other pockets of the robe was 5 rounds of .32 pistol ammunition.
The evidence goes to the crime lab for fingerprinting and DNA analysis. In 2003, it will take months to get results. Then police get a break. A few hours after the murders, the guest house tenant returns.
Showing up at the scene was the renter for the last 4 or 5 years of that apartment.
The tenant claims he just got into town. Investigators are suspicious, but his alibi checks out.
He always traveled on Mondays back to Bellevue from Boise.
We were able to quickly take him off the list of, one of our, people of interest in this case.
He's also able to tell them more about the murder weapon.
He was able to identify that murder weapon as being his rifle.
This weapon had been given to him by his father that had passed away. The weapon hadn't been used in like 10 or 15 years.
Investigators consider their next move. They review the evidence so far. A pink robe, a latex glove, a leather glove, 5 rounds of .32 caliber pistol ammunition, and the murder weapon, a .264 caliber rifle. Good clues, but still, they're just pieces of a puzzle that's far from complete.
It is one of the biggest investigations that this county's, ever seen. Nothing of this magnitude. It was just, overwhelming.
They get a solid lead from the Johnson's guest house tenant.
He was somewhat hesitant, and he said, well, I don't really, want to point fingers, and gave me his name, Bruno Santos.
The 19-year-old Mexican national is Sarah Johnson's boyfriend.
The family had a really hard time with Sarah dating Bruno.
I asked Diane, do they really love each other? And she said, well, she says that they do. And I said, well, if they do feel that way, I said, you're not going to be able to keep them apart. They're going to find a way to be together.
But the weekend before the murders, Alan Johnson had had enough.
Sarah had gone out and was going to spend the night with her friend. They were checking up on her, and her girlfriend said, well, she didn't spend the night here. And she told him that, well, you should check Bruno Santos' home.
Alan had a confrontation with Bruno, told him to stay away from his daughter and never come around.
There had been conversation that Alan was actually going to go to law enforcement. He didn't feel it was a good relationship due to the age of this gentleman, and therefore the only way that he could end it was to actually report the fact that this gentleman had been sleeping with his daughter.
Facing a statutory rape charge or deportation, Santos had plenty of motive to silence the Johnsons.
At the time, started thinking that, okay, who are possible suspects? We felt like we had Bruno Santos, we had a gentleman that lived in Boise who rented from the Johnsons, who rented their garage apartment, and we had the cleaning lady.
Investigators haul her in for questioning, but their hope for answers soon fades.
She didn't even know where the residence was. She was driven there at one time.
The maid service confirms the cleaning lady's story.
Family members confirmed that too, that there was no real confrontation between this cleaning lady.
So was Sarah's story a case of a killer on the loose, or was she trying to shift the blame away from her boyfriend? As the afternoon wears on, investigators continue gathering evidence from the crime scene.
Probably the most important photograph that we took showed the blood splatter from Diane that went off of the pillow, up the wall, across the room, and up onto the ceiling. That showed the arcing motion of the blood, the tissue, the brain, the skull fragments.
From the blood spatter, detectives are able to determine where the shooter was standing.
It was on Diane's side of the bed. It would have been the left side of the bed, approximately 3 to 4 feet away from Diane.
From the shot that killed Diane, blood splatter had left the master bedroom, had gone right across the hall to Sarah's bedroom. I can see blood splatter clear on her door, clear onto the far wall of her room.
Alan's attack came next, in the master bath.
The evidence in there showed that the bathroom door was open, the shower door was open.
Detectives speculate that Alan heard the first gunshot and stepped out of the shower to investigate. Suddenly, he stood face to face with the killer.
The other photographs of the bathroom showed that Alan, initially when he was shot, went down onto the floor.
But the blood trail proves that he pulled himself up and fought back.
There was numerous blood transfers onto the rifle, onto the barrel and the stock of the rifle. Alan was trying to grab the rifle when he was shot, and there was apparently some type of struggle right at the bathroom door. The rifle was dropped on the floor.
Investigators find another eerie piece of evidence next to the rifle.
We noticed a wooden crucifix right by the entrance to the bathroom. The crucifix was on the floor, and the plastic figurine on it was broken.
The crucifix had been ripped off the wall, and there was blood on the floor and blood on the weapon itself.
The suspect may have either bumped into that or got pulled into that or something, knocked it off the wall and broke that figurine.
Bloody footprints tell the story of Alan's last moments.
Alan followed whoever the shooter was out of the bathroom, out into the bedroom, and it appeared he started down the hall and turned around and came back.
Feeling the life drain out of him, Alan made one last.
It's evident he falls on the bed on Diana's side, rolls off the bed onto the floor by the telephone.
And then that's when he died alongside his bed next to Diane.
Searching Sarah's room, investigators find blood spatter and several other items.
In Sarah's bedroom, we located on a dresser, there was 2 rounds of .264 Winchester Magnum rounds.
On one nightstand, I found a brown leather glove that matched the brown leather glove in the trash can. Found a set of keys. One of the keys on a key ring fit the back apartment for the house there where the rifle came from.
The evidence seems to point straight back to Sarah's boyfriend. But before police can track him down, Bruno turns the tables on them and shows up at the crime scene.
I got a call and said, this guy here named Bruno Santos says that he's the boyfriend of Sarah Johnson.
Detectives asked Bruno where he was at the time of the murders.
Bruno said that he slept at his mother's house. He has witnesses to be there, his sister's there, his whole family's there. And he gave us the address of where he slept.
He claims he learned about the murders on the radio.
Bruno indicated to us that he wasn't involved at all. He gave us no indication that he had been over there at all. And so he really just wanted to see how Sarah was doing.
But when investigators question him about his relationship with Sarah, he seems to distance himself.
Other than the fact that he did acknowledge that they did have a relationship and it was a sexual relationship, he pretty well minimized it in terms of being a real serious relationship.
Sarah's friends paint a very different picture.
Several of her friends said that she was talking about him buying her a ring.
Sarah had this obsession with Bruno that she wanted to spend all the time with him. She would follow him around. She would go to his work. She would call him constantly.
Sarah characterized her relationship with Bruno as he was her only love, that they were going to get married.
When I talked to a number of her friends, they all related how Sarah talked about how she was engaged to Bruno, how they were going to be married. And in fact, a couple of days before this had showed one of the girls at volleyball an engagement ring.
Detectives wonder, was an impressionable and immature 16-year-old girl being manipulated by her older boyfriend?
We looked at him with a very jaded eye.
But detectives have a problem. Now that they know of Bruno's undocumented status, they're obligated to turn him over to immigration authorities.
And unless we charged Bruno, we were going to lose him as a witness.
With the clock ticking, police asked Bruno to submit to DNA testing.
And he agreed to that.
At the end of their first day on the case, police know only one thing for sure. The Johnsons were killed by someone they knew.
It was evident that the person that committed this crime was connected to this family. There's no question, because whoever committed this crime used everything out of that residence. Therefore, it wasn't a crime of circumstances. It wasn't a robbery that went blotched, because nobody brought the weapon to the crime scene. The weapon was in the crime scene. So it was an organized, thought-out crime.
Back in the bedroom, detectives turn their attention to some other baffling evidence.
We found 2 kitchen knives that were placed at the base of Alan Diane's bed, and they were pointed together, the knives like this, and it just seemed odd.
We determined that those knives came out of the kitchen, out of the butcher block.
And then in the guest bedroom next to Sarah, there was a knife laid across the bed right in the middle, which was, extremely strange that, somebody left those for us to find, and what was its meaning and what did it mean.
But so far, the killer is still one step ahead of the law. Unless detectives can find some hard evidence, this horrific crime seems destined to go unsolved. "24 hours after Alan and Diane Johnson were gunned down in their bedroom, it's all anyone in Bellevue is talking about.
Nothing like this had taken place in Blaine County. It was a massive effort, and it was certainly the biggest case of our career. And so there was a lot at stake here.
19-year-old Bruno Santos tops the suspect list, but hard evidence doesn't place him at the crime scene. Detectives question Sarah Johnson more closely. Step by step, Sarah recounts the shootings and the moments afterward.
Sarah told us that she was asleep and that she heard a loud noise, and she didn't know what it was. And so she laid there and said, what was that? And, talked to herself, finally got up.
Then she hears, hey. So she goes to her door. She opens her door, goes to her mom and dad's door. She bangs on the door, Mom, Dad. She doesn't get a response, and then she says she hears the sliding glass door open. She becomes afraid. She runs down the hall, goes out the front door.
But there's something terribly flawed with her story. Investigators found blood spatter in her room. If the doors in both bedrooms were closed when the killer fired, How could blood spatter make its way from her parents' room to her room?
That door had to have been open. There is no possible way that bedroom door was closed at all. It was standing wide open.
The evidence told us exactly opposite of what she said. She's adamant that the door was closed of her parents' room. Well, we found that door to be open and a pillow there to keep it propped open.
There was actually tissue and skull fragments that we located in Sarah's bedroom. The bedroom doors were exactly across from each other in the hallway.
And it was a close shot to the head, and that blood splatter had gone up, away to the back wall, and then the energy shot out, so it went clear out of the master bedroom, hitting the open door of Sarah Johnson's room, and there was actually some matter that had hit the wall.
Investigators are beginning to look at Sarah Johnson in a very different light, especially after they notice a distinctive bruise on her shoulder.
Sarah told me that she was wrestling around with Bruno and fell against the kitchen table at his house.
She had 3 bruises running up and down that were approximately 3.5 to 4 inches long, which is consistent with shooting a high-powered rifle or a shotgun. I'm thinking I'm looking at a 16-year-old girl that just killed her mom and dad.
Until now, it's a possibility investigators were reluctant to consider.
I'm Sarah's godmother, and so I've known Sarah from the day she was born. She was a good little girl. She was in everything, dance class, and did all kinds of things. She was a very charming young girl. She was great.
And the fact that a 16-year-old female was involved in this, that was very uncommon throughout the United States, especially a natural sibling killing her own parents was almost unheard of at this time.
It's extremely rare that a juvenile female would commit a murder by herself. Like, very, very rare.
But Sarah's odd behavior over the next several days fueled suspicions.
I attended the funeral with a couple other officers. Sarah comes out at the funeral, and you would think that she was coming to a senior ball.
She acted like she was happy and bubbly and giggly and everything. She was more interested in it as a social event than she did not seem to be sad or anything like that.
Family members couldn't believe it. My parents had a hard time believing that she would have done something like that.
While Bruno is still a suspect, the focus of the investigation is shifting closer to home.
The longer we worked the case, the more everything pointed back to Sarah. And the more we tried to prove that Bruno, the boyfriend, was involved, the more we proved he wasn't.
It's kind of hard to wrap your mind around a 16-year-old girl killing both parents. I mean, cold-bloodedly shooting mom while she's sleeping and shooting dad while he's walking out of the shower.
The evidence is piling up. Sarah's strange behavior, the bruises on her shoulder, the blood spatter, gun ammunition, matching glove in her bedroom, and the inconsistencies in her story.
But, you know, a lot of this is circumstantial. And, you know, you don't just start making an arrest under circumstantial evidence.
We were a long way away at that time from having our physical evidence examined, and we really didn't know at that point in time what we had to connect Sarah to this crime, and I couldn't authorize an arrest until we had enough evidence that I knew I could take to a grand jury.
Investigators redouble their efforts, looking for any physical evidence to bolster their suspicions.
There's the uneasy feeling, is this going to be the evidence that we need to finally get an arrest in this case?
Weeks after the murders of Alan and Diane Johnson, with the crime lab analysis still not complete, the case has hit a standstill.
Things were getting pretty intense because from law enforcement's perspective, they need to make an arrest. They need to have some closure out there so the community is not as up in arms, frightened as they are.
Initial sympathy for the victim's daughter has given way to suspicion.
With everything that I'd gathered and everything that I'd witnessed at this crime scene, Sarah Johnson was involved in this homicide.
But investigators still aren't sure whether Sarah acted alone or whether her boyfriend Bruno played a role. And so far, there isn't enough evidence to take either of them into custody.
From my perspective, I don't want to make an arrest that I can't take forward to a grand jury and get an indictment. And in this case, we just didn't have enough evidence to go forward.
For investigators, it's a tough call. If they don't charge Santos, he'll be deported. In the end, they decide not to proceed.
When Bruno got deported, it was real concerning to us because, again, we did not have the DNA back, and so we didn't know if any of this physical evidence would tie back to Bruno. We were real concerned when he left that we would not see him again.
Sarah is formally placed in the custody of her aunt and uncle.
I had to sit them down and to say, I think your niece is the one that killed your sister and your brother-in-law, and do you still want to take her as being their guardian?
When we brought Sarah down here, we knew that the police were building a case against her.
And these are unbelievable people, because most people, if you put yourself in their position, would have said, no way. But they brought her in, you know, they cared for her all the time knowing that she had killed Alan and Diane. Extremely tough.
Everybody just had to keep an eye on her. And so you would have to take turns because it couldn't fall on one person all the time.
Jim and I had left for the weekend, and when we came back, Sarah told me that she'd had this dream while we were gone, and this dream that she saw her mom in the kitchen. She said Mom's face was all blocked out. And then she said that she saw her dad, and he had this hole in his chest, and she didn't want to touch him or hug him because she was afraid she was going to hurt him. And he said, don't worry, you can't hurt me anymore.
But who's to say she won't turn on her new caregivers? Police stay in daily contact with the family.
I knew that they were working as hard and as fast as they could because I know that they were concerned about our safety. We knew that they had our best interest at heart, and so I was never concerned that they weren't putting everything that they had into it.
Determined to solve this puzzle, investigators redouble their efforts.
What we're trying to do is eliminate any type of defense, and we're just sealing the case against her.
They take another look at their key piece of physical evidence, Sarah's robe.
Well, we brought the robe in and went over it with bright lights and magnifying glasses looking for blood. Part of the problem was the high velocity blood mist was on the back of the robe, not on the front, where it should have been. Anytime you fire a high-powered rifle into a person, you get a certain amount of blowback of high-velocity blood mist. And if you're facing a person shooting at them at close range, that high-velocity blood mist is going to be on the front of you. Having that on the back of the robe would mean she's got her back to the person that was shot.
But there's one other possibility.
There was some high-velocity blood mist inside the cuff of the robe. The only way that would have worked is if she had the robe on backwards and had her arms up to where the blood mist would come in to those cuffs. Or she's wearing the robe on backwards.
She was actually wearing it backwards to keep the opening in the back of her and away from the blood spatter.
But with so much blood spray, how did she keep it out of her hair?
Diana's brother-in-law had commented that Sarah had a plastic shower cap hanging on the door with her pink bathrobe the week before.
When we did our search warrant, we did not locate a shower cap.
And the fact that Sarah had no blood spatter in her hair and the fact that she was smart enough to wear the robe backwards makes us feel that she wore the shower cap but was able to flush it down the toilet. Again, when we were doing the searches through the house, we found that Sarah read a lot of crime books. Sarah was very familiar with crimes and how they're investigated and the probabilities of evidence and where evidence is to be located.
As part of their case, investigators build a detailed character and psychological profile.
Sarah didn't have very many friends. She wasn't, again, really well-liked. She had a very small circle of friends.
To me, she was a very spoiled child because she got what she wanted, or she raised a big enough stink that they'd give her what she wanted and get her to be quiet.
Looking at Sarah's history with her mother, there were fights, there was a lot of emotional outbursts, outbreaks. Talking to her friends, We found that Sarah just was absolutely not truthful in almost any area, and she just turned out to be a very selfish, very cold-blooded person.
She was daddy's little girl, was constantly fighting with her mom over anything or everything.
Other family members noticed something odd.
She did not seem concerned about her mom and dad at all. She was just very, very cool and more concerned about, social things in her life, like getting her nails done, going to the high school to watch the volleyball game, that kind of stuff.
After her parents were murdered, she seemed strangely indifferent.
She never said anything about, who could have done this to mom and dad. We need to find them. I'm going to miss them so much. There was never anything like that from her.
The evidence and her behavior both point to Sarah.
I felt that she was involved. I knew that, but to what extent?
2 months after the murders, the DNA results finally come in, and with them, some long-awaited answers.
The blood located on the robe matched the blood taken from Diane Johnson, so I was able to determine that Diane Johnson's blood was present on the pink robe.
That's not all they find.
The latex glove that was with the robe found in the trash can, I did not locate any blood on that item. However, I was able to detect DNA on the interior of the glove, and that DNA matched Sarah Johnson.
Sarah's DNA was inside the latex glove. So that was our smoking gun. That was the evidence that we finally needed to make an arrest in this case.
Armed with the DNA evidence, investigators take one last crack at getting Sarah Johnson to come clean.
The thing you have to decide for yourself, Sarah, is are you going to keep insisting that you didn't have any role in this? Or are you going to give me an explanation why this happened? You've got to help yourself by getting this burden off, giving me a reason why all this took place.
Even against the mounting stack of evidence, Sarah sticks to her story.
I tell you, this is your last best chance.
Don't do anything wrong.
Sarah, I wish you would have talked to Scott, been truthful with him. But as the sheriff of this county, I have a warrant for your arrest for the murder of your parents, Diane and Alan Johnson. Charged with 2 counts of murder. And you're under arrest. Okay? Stand up.
When I walked in and told her that I was arresting her for first-degree murder, she just put her head down and sobbed. I led her to the jail, and that's where she's booked in. It isn't something that you are, wow, we solved the case and let's celebrate. We just arrested a 16-year-old girl for killing her parents. I mean, that's just, it's something that you don't celebrate.
Detectives finally have their suspect behind bars, but can they keep her there?
We now have to convince a jury that she did this, and we've got a lot of work ahead of us to make that tie. This is a long ways from being over.
The prosecution must now convince a jury that a 16-year-old girl committed one of the most horrific crimes the state of Idaho has ever seen. A year and a half after police arrest Sarah Johnson for murdering her parents, she finally goes on trial. Sarah is tried as an adult on 2 counts of first-degree murder.
The fact that Sarah Johnson was accused of killing her parents, I think, created national interest in the story. You know, during the trial, there was national media there every day. Court TV, 2020, Dateline.
I've never have been a part of something that brought this much attention.
Prosecutors map out their strategy.
We were just going to have to put on each piece of evidence and how it connected to Sarah to finally basically rule out everyone who was our original suspect. Sarah, when it came down to it, was the only person who stood to gain in this particular case and who really had the motivation and the opportunity. We had to rule out Bruno. We had to rule out the renter. We had to rule out the cleaning lady.
For prosecutors, the best way to rule out Bruno is to put him on the stand.
We got him back from Mexico. We felt like we had to get him in front of a jury so that there wouldn't be this noticeable absence of the defense's prime suspect. We asked Bruno whether or not he thought Sarah was involved, and he indicated to us that he thought she could be, and he could see Sarah getting that angry and that upset at her parents to do something like that.
Bruno's testimony is key to revealing Sarah's true character.
What ultimately ended up coming out, Sarah, again, had a huge inability to tell the truth. She was very selfish. She was very self-absorbed. Sarah just, again, had this ability to detach herself, I think, from this crime.
Meanwhile, Sarah's defense attorneys attacked the evidence and tried to shift the blame.
Essentially, the defense in this case was no blood, no guilt. It was a catchy phrase, but it really didn't make sense in our mind. There was blood everywhere. There was blood on Sarah's robe. There was blood on the gloves. They kept going back to the fact that, well, there's no blood on Sarah's face. There's no blood on Sarah's hair.
For the prosecution, the first step is to establish motive.
In Daddy's eyes, she really couldn't do anything wrong. It was Alan that took Sarah out of Bruno's house, and he's the one that tells her that we're going to have him arrested for statutory rape. Then all of a sudden, Sarah's hero, her dad, is going to have her boyfriend arrested. Dad has just turned her life upside down.
When Alan finally put his foot down and said and forbade her to see Bruno, that was the last straw. And that's when Sarah decided to choose Bruno over Alan or Diane.
Next, prosecutors lay out the physical evidence.
They put one of my photographs up that showed the height of Sarah's shoulder with the bruising. And then they had a mock frame of Alan, the rifle, and the trajectory going through Alan, and the height of the rifle and the bullet. By determining all those factors, that puts the bullet trajectory in the height of Sarah's shoulder.
And the most damning evidence of all, the DNA.
The DNA, putting Sarah's DNA in the glove, that was one of the key points. The forensics made the case.
It takes the jury less than a day to reach their verdict, guilty.
Is Sarah Marie Johnson not guilty or guilty of murder of the first degree of Diana Marie Johnson? Answer, guilty.
My reaction to the verdict was just a sense of relief, a sense of sorrow for the Johnsons, because I had got to know that family so well over the last 18 months that they almost became like family to me.
It's a feeling of justice, but it's also such sadness of what has really happened and what we've all lost, what they've lost, a daughter that they loved her, and they loved Sarah. I mean, it's just really, really tragic.
Sarah receives 2 life sentences for the murder of her mother and father.
I'm deeply grieving the loss of my parents, as well as the loss of my family, my home, my friends, and my community. I am very thankful for the love and support that my adopted family has given to me.
Sarah was sobbing uncontrollably, but again, I thought it was more because she was caught. It was one of these things. It wasn't sorrow for her mom or dad's loss. It was the fact that she was caught.
Attorneys for Sarah Johnson argued her case for appeal before the Idaho State Supreme Court on May 9, 2008. 7 weeks later, on June 26, the appeal was unanimously denied.
Given the fact of how egregious this crime was, how much planning went into it, I don't think Sarah should ever see the light of day.
Usually in these type of cases, you get that real good feeling you've done your job, but it was totally different. There was no high fives. It wasn't, great job. It was kind of, a real solemn experience, really.
For investigators, it's a case they'll never forget.
I've worked a lot of murder cases. I've interviewed serial killers. I've talked with the worst of the worst, and she has that cold-blooded look in her eyes. That's exactly what I saw when they told her that they were going to arrest her for first-degree murder of her mom and dad.